Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe. Now, the coronavirus, COVID-19, has brought to the fore challenges faced by women, especially those doing business and lobby groups that are toying with the best ideas on how to help women entrepreneurs post the pandemic. They've called on authorities to improve the integration of intra- and inter-regional trade promised by the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. They believe that the move could help eliminate food insecurity on the continent and help in lifting some parts of the continent to become major players on global food markets. Citing the example of East Africa, they argue that a result of limited options, cross-border trade, particularly of staple foods, is mainly done by women. Most operate informally with goods exceeding no more than $1,000 in value, and yet they face countless hurdles ranging from inflexible and unfavorable trading conditions to a lack of access to information, capital and markets. Well, this week, the Pan-African Businesswomen Association is gathering online to discuss the African women economy. It comes at a time when the African Continental Free Trade Agreement brings with it a myriad of new opportunities, but also in the face of the COVID-19 disruption. To talk to us about some of the challenges faced by women entrepreneurs in a wide range of sectors and the ways that they need to think about the future, we're now joined via Skype by Digital Transformation Strategist Yavi Madurai. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Yavi. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me.
All right, so Professional Women Business Association, tell us a little bit about this gathering, and it's all happening online. What are you trying to do?
So Papua is the acronym for the Pan-African Businesswomen's Association. We were founded, interesting story behind it. We were founded, or we launched on the 1st of February this year, earlier this year. So we're very much, a little baby, so to speak. Just a few days later, literally a few days later, at the 33rd Assembly of the African Union Heads of State, they declared that 2020 to 2030 will be the African Women's Decade of Economic and Financial Inclusion. So that aligned nicely, very, very nicely, very, very conveniently with what Papua's goals are. And Papua was looking at it from an economic perspective. I mean, you've just given us some facts and statistics in terms of the amount of contribution that women make across the continent in every country, especially from an informal trade perspective. The fact that we don't even have these stats, confirmed and verified tells us about how much the value of the woman economy is not necessarily measured on a daily basis. So, yeah, we're looking at it from the perspective of how do we start to impact? Action is the basis of our game in terms of not being another talk shop. And having said that, Papua Africa Week, which is, we're in the midst of it right now, we decided to not just honor Africa Day. Being our first Africa Day, we decided to launch Africa Week on Africa Day, and we're having virtual discussions, fireside chats and panel discussions the whole week around these kind of things that are impacting women in business, women in trade across Africa and the diaspora. So yeah, we started this morning with the AFCFTA Secretary General, the Honorable Wamkele Mene, and we had a very insightful discussion this morning, and it just basically opens up the door to many, many further discussions this week.
All right. Well, you've mentioned the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and I just wonder, I mean, on the one hand, it does offer up a lot of opportunities, and on the other, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, it's almost as if the brakes have been put on it. But let's talk about what the Continental Free Trade Agreement and also what COVID-19 has done in terms of looking at other ways of doing business, particularly for women, has made possible.
Sure. So if I can answer your question in two ways. The first is that, and I'm going to speak about the session that we had this morning with Wamkele in terms of some of his sentiments around the AfCFTA. The fact that it's being delayed in inverted commas because of COVID-19 for obvious reasons. I mean, everything is being delayed. But what he is saying is that their tangible goals that they are still going to be able to meet. One of the key statements that he made, it was a very interesting an hour-long conversation, but one of the key sentiments or key statements that he made was that what else does Africa have to rely on right now that is almost up and ready to go in terms of the economic recovery of the continent, especially from a trade perspective? And the answer to that is the AfCFTA. So while there may be delays in the actual launch date, it's not going to hold back the ability for the Secretariat to deliver on some or most of their goals in terms of their deadlines. So he seems very determined and focused on meeting some of those goals. And he spoke about the fact that trade will look different. You know, the digitalization and digitization of trade and the types of businesses that will emerge after COVID-19 has come and gone is going to change the face of not just African trade, but global trade. And from that, I caveat straight into what are the opportunities when we look at it from a business perspective. And so in my capacity today, I'm talking to you as the executive director of Papua. But as you know me, I'm the digital technology person that is normally talking digital and tech. And that's my passion. So when we look at it, and when we looked at it from a Papua perspective, one of the key things is how do we utilize the aspects of advanced technology when we look at it in terms of the fourth industrial revolution. And for me, and it's a statement I love to make, is that the fourth industrial revolution could be the revolution for women from an economic perspective, purely if we look at it like that and look at how technology allows us access and allows us to be able to create innovative products, businesses, business models that are aligned to certain lifestyles of women across the continent, certain cultural laws that prevent them from maybe working in the formal sector, etc., etc., etc.
All right, so we've had chats offline, and one of the things that struck me is that across the continent there are various cultural practices that make it difficult for women actually to do business, and that in a digital era, actually working from home and using the digital platforms make things possible.
Absolutely. So now you've got me going, because it's a topic I love to talk about. So I don't need much encouragement. And I gave you the example when we spoke offline before the interviews that, and I'm going to use a really basic example. We don't even have to go into all the technicalities of digital transformation and all of those kind of scenarios. As we know, there's a lot of the world, and specifically in Africa, where cultural traditions, even legal reasons, prevent women from, going to a physical workplace or being involved in work. There's also cultural and traditional laws around women owning land, for example, in certain parts of Africa. So when you look at it like that, and the fact that the pandemic has forced us to leapfrog and engage and embrace digital when we have no choice, or when we thought we had time and then we didn't have time all of a sudden, it allows us to be able to look at the world differently. The example I gave you earlier was, women that are prevented in inverted commas because they may not be forcibly prevented, but due to various reasons, now all of a sudden, if they've got internet access, and in certain parts of Africa, internet is very cheap. If they've got internet access, if they've got a device of some kind in terms of a mobile phone, for example, or a smartphone, they are able to, set up different business models. The example I gave you was all the different Instagram shops, in inverted commas, that we find burgeoning on Instagram in terms of selling, clothing online. It moves from China. Well, in a world before COVID-19, it used to move from China, and move straight to our courier boxes or our home addresses. So this was the kind of stuff that we need to look at. And in terms of the world of work now and the ways work will change, what does that mean for women, and how are they able to look at their situation and look at, but what are the opportunities that I could have if I'm able to not necessarily go to a formal workplace?
All right, so perhaps as we start to wrap up, the continent is very young, and young women often are ending up at the end of the list, as it were. And I just wonder, how do we make sure that young women, young female entrepreneurs are not left behind as we go forward on the continent?
So from a personal perspective, my view from a youth perspective has always been we ignore the youth at our peril, because I don't know how long we think we're going to be able to work and control everything. So we ignore the youth at our peril. That's the first thing. The second thing, or the second aspect to it, is that if you look at the world around us in terms of the futurists will tell you, and strategists and scenario planners, whatever you want to call them, will tell you that the future of the world lies in the hands of young Black African female. So if that is the future of our world, what are we doing to invest in these people? Currently, they are the most marginalized, and I include all aspects of across the world, not just in Africa, but Africa being the youngest and the most at risk, in inverted commas. So how do we start to invest in these people now? How do we start to look at this age group and invest in what their future holds? And it doesn't mean that because they have different ideals and different ideas, it's because they're looking for their futures and the way that they see things. To answer your question directly, it's a matter of saying, what does the world need to be able to achieve? We need to look at things like, okay, so technology was the one thing we spoke about. We need to look at the environmental factors. We need to look at all of those kind of things that are not necessarily part of our daily discussions now, but are part of the youth discussions in terms of their future. So we've got to be able to provide them with skills and everything else that allow them to be able to help us get older and help us take care of our world.
Yeah, and as you say, we ignore them at our own peril. Yavi, great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and I hope we can catch up again real soon. Thanks so much for your time.
Absolutely.
All right, that's Yavi Madurai, who's a digital transformation strategist, joining us via Skype and talking about women inclusion in the world of business and the economy on the continent, particularly in an environment where with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is coming into play. A bit delayed, but the General Secretary is saying that perhaps it's an opportunity for us to think a little bit out of the box and think of new ways of doing things, because this is a game changer. And we'll be talking a lot more about that in the coming days, I have no doubt. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more for you right here on The Globe. Stay with us.